Hello everybody, this is Peter Svidler with the highlights video of round 6 of Tata Steel Vaikanzai tournament in 2017. Round 6 was a reasonably quiet round, apart from two games which made all the news. One of them I will be covering for this video, and the other one is interesting for its own reasons because Anish Giri, after having two very promising positions in rounds 4 and 5, finally broke through and won a game with white against Jan Nepomniachtchi, breaking a longish streak of draws which started probably even before the London Chess Classic and included the entire London Chess Classic in the first 5 rounds of this tournament. But the game I'm covering for this video is a game played by Richard Rapport with white against the Chinese youngster Wei. So let's go into that. As you can see on your screen, previously they have played 6 games, and all 3 results were featured equally. But both of them won 2 games, lost 2 games, and 2 games were drawn. And both of them are supreme tacticians. And before the round even started, I was very happy about the fact that Richard is white against Wei, because Wei currently is very heavily a Petrov player, and I thought with Richard's repertoire being as wide as it is and as wild as it is, there is no way this will be a Petrov, and therefore we're in for an interesting game. I was absolutely correct about the interesting game bit, but we did get a Petrov. Knight f3, knight f6, knight e5, d6, and this was cause for concern, but it lasted 4 moves and actually 3 moves, and already once knight c4 appeared on the board, it became clear that we should not have worried, and Richard will not let us down. This move exists, but it's not really supposed to give white anything. It's all knight takes e4, and normal theory from here proceeds d4, d5, knight e3, and here it's important for black to play queen f6. And it's actually even possible to become slightly worse with white here, because queen f6 is a very awkward move to meet. Instead of that, Richard plays queen e2, queen e7, and knight e3. A slightly different take on the same idea, and currently creating a very strong threat of knight d5, of course, which has to be met somehow. I'm pretty sure this will not refute the Petrov, but it does lead to fresh unknown positions, and both players had plenty of reasons to start thinking very early on. Wei chose to play bishop e6. It was also possible to play just c6, d4, d5, and the position would get a lot more balanced, because I think if black develops like this, he is a lot more likely to try and play g6, bishop g7, and castle kingside, and then we would not have gotten a kind of a sharp and double-edged position, as you will see in the game. Instead, Wei played bishop e6, which is in some ways a less comfortable move to make, but I think mainly he was planning to develop the knight to c6, and because of that he did not want to put a pawn there, which I think adequately explains bishop e6, knight c3. And here, I suppose, was the final moment where black could have aimed for a quiet opposition, and it's not even entirely sure if he would have achieved that had he played knight takes c3 in the game where he played knight f6. After knight c3, I think Richard probably would have taken with the b pawn, because if you take with the d pawn, the position after g6, g3, bishop g7, bishop g2, c6 is probably just fine for black. But if you take with the b pawn and after g6 you play g3, bishop g2, c6, and I think with this capture this makes more sense. And now you play f4 followed by f5, then you castle short, and the position also is very non-standard. It's a very atypical structure you don't see very often. Black probably is completely fine, but it definitely leads to interesting double-edged positions, despite the fact that white will now be forced to. Both sides will be very likely to castle kingside. In the game where he played knight f6, and as long time admirers of Richard, we expected him, because the bishop on f1 probably needs to be developed by fianchettoing it. We were very much expecting Richard to go for the long fianchetto, a theme that he really likes employing in many of his games. But and black cannot really take this pawn because, for instance, if you take twice, there is a pin on the e-file, which means that the knight on g4 is not lost immediately, but knight d5 just wins on the spot. But black can play knight c6, g5, and in this position during the game, I assume that the knight has to go back. But it actually is a lot stronger to play knight g4 here. Because black now has the additional opportunity to play knight d4 whenever he wants. And after knight d5, queen d7, this position is probably quite good for black. And Richard, after some thought, went for a more restrained g3, knight c6, bishop g2. It's too early to play knight d4 here, so black played queen d7. And once again, there are all kinds of possible moves here, which are pedestrian in nature and which would lead to black getting a very good position immediately. But Richard was not going to give Wei an easy game. And he, without too much thought, played b4, d5, b5, knight d4, and queen d3. And in this position, black is more or less obliged to play c5, but this is a fine move. You support your knight on d4, which is actually, because of the position of the knight on c3 in particular, it's very difficult to challenge it. White can spend some time trading it off, but it's very difficult to chase it away with a pawn, because the knight on c3 really doesn't have very good squares to prepare c2, c3. And white could take on c6 and on d5 here, but I'm pretty sure Richard did not spend too much time looking at this for a very simple reason that black can take, and in this position rook d8, queen e3 is not really very good, but black can castle long. Now c4 bishop f5 is just extremely good for black. Therefore white has to play knight f4, and here black has a choice. Bishop d6 is quite playable with very sharp positions arising after takes, and let's say queen e2, queen f6, check, king c7, c3, check, and king f1. Or black could simply just take on d3, and after c takes d3 play something like bishop g4, and this position quite likely will end in some kind of an equal endgame, because I suspect there will be mass simplifications ahead. Instead of all this, Richard played castles, which is a lot more ambitious. Black, in reply, castled long, and here he played a somewhat mysterious move, rook e1, because I think you generally would like to play bishop b2 here. I think bishop b2 is a more natural move here than rook e1, and somewhat curiously, our in-house engine in this position, now that we've analyzed b takes c6 on the previous move, it is suggesting in this position b takes c6 once again as the strongest move. I think we've permanently broken the engine here by our famous en passant misadventures during the World Championship match, and it is now absolutely schizophrenic when it's thinking about these things. It actually is a move I can make once again. Isn't that wonderful? This is, I honestly don't know how this happens. Please disregard this position. This position is not really a position that can occur in a game where rules are abided by. Anyway, I think I probably would have opted for bishop b2, because I would be very interested in trying to challenge the knight on d4 as early as possible. But Richard goes for rook e1. And here Wei decides that times are wasting and opts for a direct attack on the king side, which I think is perfectly reasonable. At least the first move, I think, would have been made by any living and breathing organism in this position, because h4 followed by takes, bishop h3 is such a natural way to proceed from here. But after h4, this is where it gets interesting. During the live broadcast, I was advocating for rook g8 here, because I felt that g5 needs to be prepared. And this move would lead to very, very unclear positions, probably ending, as usual with complications these days, ending in some relative equality. But play becomes very wild. White plays bishop b2. You probably want to justify your previous move by playing g5, although here the machine is not entirely happy about it. But having played rook g8, you kind of have to play g5. Takes, and here white has a very strong move, knight a4. Using the fact that the knight on f6 will be hanging, therefore queen takes b5 is not an option black can use. And also creating a threat of knight takes c5 and bishop takes d4. And in this position, black has two options. You can either play b6, simple h4 is just pretty bad for black here, because you are not really making too much progress on the king side, and your queen side and central situation completely collapsed. You will probably get destroyed on the other side of the board. Therefore, the choice is between b6, bishop takes d4, cd4, queen takes d4, and I probably should stop clicking through the moves. Rook ac1 is of course an option here, but bishop takes d4, cd4, queen takes d4 is the main line. And black can play knight e4 here, and this position is very, very complicated because yes, white has an extra pawn and also can play, for instance, c2, c4 immediately. But on the other hand, if you give black a tempo, first of all, bishop g7 is a large threat, but even if black just manages to open up the queen to the king side by playing h5, h4, the attack against the white king will be quite significant. And the machine suggests that the main line here is c4, bishop g7, knight b6, a b6, queen takes b6, bishop takes a1, c takes b5, d5, and in this position the only move is bishop b2 to stop rook c1, which is a very large threat. And apparently, this is always very confusing when you see these evaluations, but such is life these days. Apparently this leads to equality, although looking at this position, I think equality is the last thing you suspect. The other option for black is after knight a4 to play knight e4 straight away. And once again, this leads to tremendous complications, but white is always fairly safe, but I guess black should hold here if he plays precisely. A sample line here would be knight takes c5, and here black even includes knight f3 check to make the threat of h4 in this position even stronger. Takes, and queen takes d2. And in this position, white needs to start combining attack with defense, because the obvious rook ad1, which looks like it's winning on the spot, actually runs into rook g3 and bishop takes e3. And this endgame is even slightly better for black, although probably this will end in a draw. Therefore, rook g8 was a very, very sensible move to consider in this position. But white has just enough time to start a very serious counterplay on the other wing. And the move the machine likes the most is knight d4. Oh, sorry, not g5. Knight d4 f5. After which quiet replies are quite good for black. But white can start immediate counterplay by playing b6. This motif you will see later in the game as well. And here black has an option of either playing a6, keeping everything under control on the queen side, or playing a takes b6, allowing rook b1, and this does become very double-edged, and both sides have chances for attack on opposite flanks. And the game would have been very, very interesting from here. But Wei was not in the mood for preparation. He decided to play g5 immediately, and this probably is not a great idea in this position if white plays precisely, but you can understand the Chinese player's instincts, because you don't want to give white any time to consolidate, to make some useful moves like b6 followed by rook b1, or bishop b2 might be a very useful idea in some positions. And here Richard did something very strange. I believe he thought for a while in this position, which is absolutely correct, and he should have done that, because it's a complicated situation on the board, and you have to calculate far, and you have to calculate precisely. And he did find the best move in this position, which is b5, b6. White could also just take on g5, play knight cd5, and after h4. The variations are very similar to the ones I will be showing later. But the inclusion of b6 and a6 is actually in white's favor in more than one position, and I will be showing you why once again as we're going through the complications arising from here. So his choice of b6 was very good, and also he was absolutely correct in carefully considering his options. But after a6, the following sequence he more or less blitzed out without pausing for thought and reevaluation at almost any point until a position appeared on the board, which was suddenly very bad for white. And this is somewhat strange because Richard actually had a ton of time here. I think more than half an hour to begin with. H takes g5, knight g4, knight c takes d5, absolutely correct move. Knight e d5 would allow bishop f5, and white is immediately in some trouble because you don't want to be playing bishop e4 and allowing, for instance, bishop takes and h4 is quite promising for black here. And it's quite clear that with the black queen side reasonably safe, black's initiative on the other side of the board is a lot faster here. Knight cd5, h4. It was possible to sort of slow down for a second and start with bishop g7, but then knight c7 is quite strong. Knight e5, queen e4, and white is combining attack with defense. White prevented the black knights for the time being from landing on f3, and after queen c6 takes, white will have to give up some material, but after bishop b2, knight ef3, and king h1, the amount of material white will get for the exchange he is currently sacrificing on e1 is tremendous, and also positionally, black structure is ruined all over the board. This is probably very good for white. And of course, h4, g4 is sufficient to not allow any opening of the h-file. Therefore, Wei goes h4, and this is perhaps the turning point of the entire game. But as I said, after b6, a6, it had taken Richard about 3 minutes in total to make his next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 moves. And he really should have paused at some point. And this perhaps was the last time where that pause would have given him very serious options. He played knight c7 here with a very concrete idea of, as the arrows demonstrate, bishop takes b7 and queen takes a6 check, but unfortunately it's just not fast enough. Instead of that, a move that's a lot less attractive on aesthetic grounds, so to speak, knight takes g4, would have given him reasonable winning chances, because if black takes on g4, you just play bishop b2, h3, and bishop takes d4. Very importantly, you attack the rook on h8, and if black takes on d4, I suspect bishop e4 is totally winning, but knight f6 I think is even stronger, and white is in complete control because his king side is now totally safe. You can put the bishop on e4 at any point, and you will meet h2 check with king h1, and white is a number of pawns up. He's also ahead both in the center and on the queen side, and his king side is safe, so that's totally lost. Black needs to take on d5, then you play knight f6. The only move black can make here is bishop takes g2. Everything else loses on the spot. Knight takes d7, knight f3 check. If black plays h3, white, the simplest solution is just to play knight e5, and once black is robbed of a chance to play knight f3 check, it becomes quite obvious that there's just no attack on the king side here. So knight f3 check. Of course, you don't play king takes g2, knight takes e1. That would be a mistake. You play queen takes f3, and after bishop takes f3, you play bishop b2. Once again, this thematic idea of gaining an important tempo by attacking the rook on h8, rook h5, knight takes f8, hg, fg, rook takes f8. And this is maybe the first point where you can really demonstrate why including b6 and a6 was so important. Rook takes d2 would have maybe even given mate with the pawns on b5 and a7. But with the pawn on b6, rook e8 check wins on the spot because king c7 is not a legal move you can make. And therefore black is forced to go rook d8 back and play an endgame where he is a full rook down. Sorry, full piece down, not a rook down, of course. But I mean, piece is more than enough here. Therefore black has to take on f8, white plays bishop f6. And this is just an endgame 2 pawns up for white. because it's an opposite color endgame, color bishop endgame, and the king is not entirely safe even on f2. The game after something like king d7 will continue, and white is not guaranteed to win this. But I think he's favored to win this because the black king is also not very safe, and as I mentioned, white is currently 2 pawns up. Instead of all this, Richard played knight c7, and I haven't seen any post-game interviews, and I would like to know what he missed, because black's play is very strong here, but it's also very simple. Black just goes h3, and this position was the final time where black could have, where white could have turned back. He is no longer better, but if he once again destroys one of the most important attackers here, plays knight takes g4, bishop g4, bishop e4, as it was previously, is not very attractive because with the bishop on e4 and the king on h1, white just can, the king side is under control, there are no threats. So h takes g2, but here understanding that white is fine would have taken a lot of work, and I think without machine help, it's not immediately obvious that white will survive, but the variation is very forcing. You take on e6, rook h1, check, trying to preserve the g2 pawn doesn't quite work, because you can play rook e4 followed by king takes g2 here, and the attack once again fizzles out. So rook h1 check, king takes g2, rook takes c1, knight takes d8. And in this position there are a number of draws available to black, and he can also take on g4. And a somewhat weird position arises after bishop b2, rook a1, bishop a1, king g8, and simply bishop takes d4. And both positions, yeah, it's worth noting that, of course, you would like to play c3 and win the material back, but then black unpins himself by playing queen f5, and that endgame is quite bad. But simply taking on d4 and replying to queen takes d4 with queen f3 and to c takes d4 with queen c4, black does have the extra piece, but white has 3 pawns for it, and his king is a lot safer. So I think white is just not going to lose this position. Neither is he going to win it, of course, but this was still a way to salvage the game for Richard. But I don't think Richard was particularly interested in salvaging. He was interested in giving mate. Sadly for him, there is no mate here. King takes b7, queen takes a6, and king c6. And here he must have realized that something has gone badly wrong, because the king is actually doing very, very well in the center here. The knight on d4 is such an octopus that it's controlling so many squares white can give checks from. And also black is now a piece up with continued attack on the king side. And this position is just utterly lost for white. Richard played knight takes g4. If you play rook f1, at least trying to stop black from taking on f2 after h2 and king h1. Knight takes e3, d takes e3, and a very simple move, bishop g4, just delivers mate for black. f3, queen f5, and it becomes very, very obvious that it's not white here giving mate, it is black, and black will eventually give mate here. Richard played knight takes g4, bishop takes g4, and b7 check. Queen a4, king d6 is quite prosaically completely lost, because the checks run out and you actually have to start trading queens, and then your position is totally hopeless. b7 check was played because of that, king c7, queen a5. And here Wei accumulated a little bit of time by repeating once, and then the king went forward, and because white really only has the one attacker on b6, this position is totally lost, of course. You can continue throwing material into the fire. White could have played c4 check, king takes c4, and d3 check, but in this position both moves are perfectly fine. You can even take on d3 and your position is winning, but the king can also just return to d5. The important thing is here is that white has no time for any kind of quiet moves, because h2 is not a check. It will lead to immediate mate, maybe on the next move. And because of that, Richard played rook e3. And here also pretty much any move that makes some sense wins for black. But Wei's solution was very elegant. He played h2 check, king h1, and in this position he played queen c6. seemingly blundering a rook with check. But if you take on d8, black plays king c4, discover check, f3, and for instance queen f3 and bishop takes f3, which I think would have been a more fitting end to this game. Richard, of course, realized how totally hopeless his position was, but he decided not to allow his opponent this joyous conversion, conclusion to the game. And he played rook b1, which does stave off immediate mate. But after the simple queen b6, rook b6 and bishop d6, black is 2 pieces up with continued attack on the king side. And after bishop b2, rook d8, creating a threat of bishop f3 check and rook e1 check, h1. For instance, bishop mate, like some position like this, we can put on the board once again for the sake of aesthetics. And after rook d8, Richard finally decided to resign because there's just no way to continue here. A very, very interesting game between two very exciting, very promising young players. We will be seeing a lot of them in the future, but in this tournament, Wei is having much the happier time of it. He is, after that victory, back to +1, having beaten Jan Nepomniachtchi early in the tournament before losing to Magnus Carlsen. Richard, on the other hand, is not really having a great event, and I'm sure that his play in that game and his seemingly total concentration on only the moves that took his pieces forward and complete disregard for options which would allow him to trade into good endgames. I think it may have been somewhat influenced by how his tournament is going, because I'm sure he is not really enjoying the situation he finds himself in. And it's very commendable that he's doing what he's doing, but it doesn't seem to be working currently. But as I said, I'm sure he will remain a fixture in top level events, because he is a tremendously exciting and also a very, very skillful player, and it's always a pleasure to watch his games and to annotate them afterwards. And with this, I will conclude the highlights of round 6. Round 7 actually starts in 20 minutes, so you probably will have the option of watching this video and the live video of round 7 side by side. Feel free to do that. This has been Peter Svidler for Chess24.